Okay, we're this is a second edition of CONEXEC, Construction Executive, the podcast where aspiring and current construction executives get together and talk. Today I am sitting here with a friend of mine, David Dean, from Dean Builds, and sitting in his new office here, which is, by the way, is pretty awesome.
Thank you.
You know,
yeah, appreciate it.
Too much yellow though. No, I'm just, but
It's our logo.
I know. I when I drove up, I was actually really impressed that you guys did the brick line out front. So
Yeah,
that
right.
of yellow. So David, I know you and I know your background, but you know our audience doesn't. So can you kind of just tell me about you, kind of your story, where you grew up, what you've done, and up until where you currently are?
Yeah, I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky, and I started kind of getting familiar with the construction industry at the beginning of my teen years. Both my grandfathers were in asphalt and ready-mix concrete business. So in the summer times, or even when I was up there on vacation, I would always spend time with them at the concrete plant. Summers in college, I worked at the concrete plant. Always tell people the greatest job I ever had in the world was driving a concrete truck because, at the end of the day, you got your 6-pack of beer and you went home, and that was about the only thing you worried about. So, but right about the time I graduated college, my uncle and grandfather came in the door and basically said they were selling the concrete business, and that really kind of steered me quickly into trying to find a job. So I came out of EKU's construction management program, graduated in 95. And
what got you to go to EKU?
I had no idea there was a construction management program, really. I was really at UK taking the engineering route, and came over. I was probably 2 years into it and figured I didn't really want to design. Heard about EKU's construction management program, went over there and checked it out. I remember meeting with John Stratman, and he kind of pushed me into the program. So I spent 3 years over at EKU and graduated with a construction management degree.
Do you remember what years you were there? It was early 90s?
Yeah, it was
80s?
early 90s because, I graduated in 95, so I'd have been there. It was, if you remember, the founding member of that program was Richard Brooker, and he actually taught me in a class or two.
Oh, really?
Over there, yeah.
So Wayne came on. Wayne Reynolds was another professor. He came on, 92, so he was there during your time.
I was there his first year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Well, small world, huh?
I know, yeah.
Yeah. So when you graduated, what'd you do? Where'd you go to work?
Well, I had some familiarity with Gray Construction. We worked on a project up in Carrollton, Kentucky with them, and a few of those folks I knew well from that project, and so I reached out to them and got an interview. And I think, and most people don't remember this, but, 92, 93, there was somewhat of a recession, and I think I was in a group of people that might have been the first group that Gray had hired again since that recession. So,
well, when you got hired in Gray, it was probably a fairly small, comparatively today.
Yeah,
it was
right.
a small company.
It was. They were probably doing somewhere around $170 to $200 million worth of work back then. So a lot smaller than they are today. And I think everybody, they were still in the blue building downtown, so they had all.
So you were in the same building they're in currently?
No.
Oh, okay.
The blue building, which is financial building downtown.
Oh, Fifth Third.
So,
okay.
Fifth Third building. Yeah, I call it the blue building.
The blue building. Yeah. Well, it is known as the blue building. So when did Gray move into their current offices? Do you remember?
They moved in somewhere around the late 90s.
Okay.
I do remember that being renovated. I worked out in the field. First, Gray puts everybody out on projects, and I got pushed down to a little town called Bologna, Alabama, in the middle of nowhere, western Alabama. So at the time it was the smallest, it was the only county that had filed bankruptcy in the United States, I think, at the time. So we went down there for the Mercedes work.
So was that the first job you had with Gray?
Very first job.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so
you're the project engineer on that job?
Yes.
Or? Okay.
Yeah, I was. It was a design build tier 1 facility that we did. They put tire and wheel assemblies together for Mercedes Benz. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you stay down there? Because I know you opened the Alabama office. Or you stayed there, or did you come back?
I stayed there for that project, and then I came back, and they made me a superintendent / project manager on a job in Maysville for a company called Stover Drives. I had no clue what I was doing when I went out there, and I my biggest strength was my offense. I covered up a lot of my ignorance with a good offense, and so that job was successful. And then I moved into a full project management position at Gray, and I would sit down every year with Steve Summers and ask him. He was my boss at the time. What did I need to do to make steps inside the company, because it was a big organization.
Yes.
So he sat me down one day and just told me, a lot of people can be project managers, but if you can sell work, there's a good that's going to be core to the strength of your growth.
And when I think about that, and now knowing I'm a business owner, and obviously you are a business owner, I'd have to say that's probably the hardest thing.
Yeah, it really is.
I mean,
and most people are good project managers or good site managers, but the thing that they realize, if they go out on their own or they move up into higher management positions, that you really can't do anything without being able to sell that job. So,
well, they always say, the best carpenters are sometimes the worst businessmen.
Right.
My father-in-law used to say that all the time, but that is 100% true.
Yeah.
And I try to explain. I have a younger gentleman that is my business development director, and he wants to be in the technical aspect, or wanted to be in the technical aspect, and I try to explain to him that what you do is far more important.
Right.
If you want to be an executive someday.
Yep.
And I think I finally got through to him, but that's a hard thing. Because people want to be people want to get their hands dirty, especially when they're younger, What I find interesting is that me and you kind of have very similar paths. We're dinosaurs now.
Yeah.
Because people don't go through a lot of things that we went through. People don't become superintendents and then project managers anymore, or go that route.
Yeah.
Which is advantage and disadvantage,
There are. I think from a positive strength standpoint with that is that you really understand the craft if you're out in the field, and I think being out in the field, starting out in the field and actually building a project, at least for me, and I see the same thing with guys that are in Dean Builds now, is it allows them to be better project managers. Because they know how the nuts and bolts go together. So
you came back from Alabama to Lexington, and then you were in Lexington for a while, and then they opened an office in Alabama? Yeah,
Gray asked me at the beginning of, it's probably 2002, if I'd be interested in going down and starting an office for them in Birmingham. That was a good automotive market at the time. Mercedes was down there, Toyota, and Hyundai was getting ready to put a new facility in. And so we were really good at design build projects, and that industry typically goes design build. And we went down there. I went down there with an estimator, and we started an office. Had no clue, didn't know hardly anybody. Gray did have a presence down there. We had done some projects down there. But we started with 2 people, and we built an office. And I think, when I left, I was down there for 4 years. We built a good team, and that office has been successful since.
Well, I went down there and actually met with Patrick McCallum.
Yeah, Patrick.
And they always say you can tell your success on the legacy that you leave, and you left a good legacy down there.
Yeah, it was great.
I was very impressed with the offices they have down there, and what they've built and how much that has grown. Literally, that office, when you said that Gray was about $150 million or so, that office is doing as much as Gray did back when
Right.
you started.
Yeah.
Now, and that's a significant thing. So then you came back. So did you come back to Gray and Lexington, or is that when you made the
No,
transition?
I kind of, I did the 4 years. I felt like we accomplished the goals that they set out for me to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
I sat down and asked or told Stephen Gray that I wanted to go out and do my own business, and he was very open to that idea. And so I had to make a choice. Did I want to do it in a market like Alabama where I had great connections? Or did I want to come back to Kentucky where I grew up and do the business? So I spent about a year and a half looking for businesses to buy. I didn't want to start a business. I kind of was focusing in on some small general contracting company I could buy. And,
Is there a reason that you didn't want to start an own one? Your own one?
I thought it would be easier to kind of get into the business with something that had already started. Something that already had a reputation and a name. The other thing is, and this is kind of more personal, is I dealt with cancer early in my life, and so health insurance was a big part of that. And,
Absolutely.
And having that continuing health insurance that because I didn't want to have a pre-existing condition. If I got into a business that already existed, it would be a lot better opportunities from a healthcare standpoint too. So.
Well, that's something I didn't know about you.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, I don't know if you know my wife is a cancer survivor too.
Great.
She had breast cancer.
Yeah.
And luckily we found it in stage 1, so
that's great. Yeah.
Not everybody's as lucky as my wife and you.
No, you're right. Yeah.
So,
it's definitely an eye opener, and it changes your life. And I always tell people it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me, because it really just allowed me to kind of refocus on what things were important in my life. And I always say that most of the people that I worked with went through that experience with me, and I think that just getting through something like that with your family and friends is puts a different perspective on life, as you probably noticed as well. Yeah.
So that must have been a difficult discussion to have with Steven. You worked with him for years. You open up their Alabama office. Obviously, you were successful, and I know you were successful at Gray. And then to go do your own thing, that must have been a hard choice for you to make. In addition to the fact that, obviously you felt probably a lot of loyalty to Gray because you've been with them for a long time. So tell me about that.
The Gray family was great to me. We still have a great relationship. I talk to both Jim and Steven often. I still have great connections over there. They've been real helpful with my business. I think the smartest decision I made was not competing against them. I saw in the past that other folks that had left the company competed with them head to head, and it just never was good. And so, I picked '08 to go out on my own, and everybody knows what happened in 2009, so the timing was terrible.
I never realized it was '08 when you worst time.
Yeah, so I got stuck in the greatest recession that's ever occurred on the planet, so they say. So, before that, Scott, I really thought the only thing that would hold me back in growing a business would be myself. I'd never had experienced an economy that really prohibited my growth in any business since I'd been out of college. And I've quickly found out that when the country gets into a recession like we had back then, it stops everything. And it really is completely out of your hands. So...
and people have a tendency, I think, people have a tendency to forget about it. We're 11 years from that, and people are already forgetting that ever occurred.
No,
and
you're
the
right.
desperation people had,
And I think the people that lived through it are probably still a little skittish about recessions and what can happen, and we're probably better planners for it, too. I think that we... are aware of what that can do to a company or a business.
So when you went into business, you went into own your own business, probably just a few people, handful of people, and then how did you get from being at you to now? I don't know how many people you have on staff total, but obviously a lot more than you now.
Right.
What do you think really took you from here to there?
Well, just to kind of give you a background, I bought into a company that was called W.D. Graves, and Dan Graves and his wife Lambsy owned that business, and I bought 50% of the company, and that was right around 2007. So When I bought into the company, I had aspirations to continue in the industrial market, design build market. But with the economy, the work in Kentucky just stopped in that market. So back then, they were probably a company of, we might have had 5 employees, I think. Small company at the time, mainly doing commercial work. I'd never been in that market before. So I was learning as I was going, but we kind of put a plan together and hooked into some good customers on the commercial retail side with automotive dealerships specifically. And then we were somehow stumbled into work with a company called Aramark, which is the largest food company probably in the country, at least one of them. And those were 2 customers that had, even during the recession, had pretty aggressive growth and building programs at the time.
I think they had a really good model going
They
into like what they did at EKU. It's a great model, you know. We can save you money and give you something better, you know. So,
and both of those customers put a high priority on schedules, and we were at the time really good at getting jobs completed on time. We had ability to get good manpower, and I think that was a strength at the time.
So now that we're talking about Dean Builds, can you kind of describe Dean Builds as a company? If I guess your 1-minute speech to a client when they ask you about Dean Builds.
Yeah, I mean we're obviously a commercial general contractor, and our markets are mainly focused in the retail automotive, retail commercial project, big boxes like home goods and staples and projects like that. And then we do probably 30% of our business is restaurants and food service related. And then the other third is probably made up of private school work. We are doing projects for UK as well on the public side, but we mainly look at private colleges or schools to focus on.
Yeah, I know you got a connection like Sayre. I've seen Sayre. You've done quite a bit of work for Sayre.
Yeah, we did the new elementary school for them as well as their athletic complex. They've been real good to us. That was a customer we had back at Gray, too. I was able to build their high school back then, and they've been a great customer for us.
So what do you think is the most significant event in your company's history that kind of developed the model that you have today?
I thought about that, and we brought it up. I really think that recession is what is probably one of the biggest events, because it completely changed the whole focus of our marketing plan. We went from really myself focusing on design build industrial projects and got into retail projects. We really scrambled. I mean, back then you were just digging through everything to find work, and our company was young at the time. We didn't have a whole lot of overhead, so it was a little bit easier to float, but it made us scramble, and we hooked into a couple of really good customers that just built through that recession. And I really think that kind of steered us towards a predominantly commercial retail-based company.
So what was did you have a specific event that was a game changer for you? I mean, like, hey, I got this client, or this happened, or, because like when I think about my company, my big game changer was when I got a project in North Carolina with one of the largest site work contractors in the world. And that was a game changer for me. The first big contract I ever got, I mean, it changed the entire structure of my company.
Right.
Did you have anything significant? Was it a client or a project or an event that was a game changer for you?
Yeah, the interesting part about this business is sometimes you just kind of fall into markets, and you fall in with customers. And, back then we had the shotgun approach to marketing. We were a young company, and we just kind of blasted our message out there, and whatever, we hit, we took, right? It wasn't very strategic like it is now. So I think if you look at one customer that really helped our growth in a specific market, it would have been Steve Gates with Gates Automotive. He owns multiple dealerships around the country, and we were able to do projects for him, not only in Kentucky, but in Tennessee and Indiana as well.
Same gates that in Richmond, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Same,
All right.
that's their headquarters, yes. And so when we did that work, it opened up the door to other automotive dealerships. And, it was just a snowball from there because at the time, most of the retail automotives were going through an image change or building new dealerships. And that allowed us to grow specifically in Kentucky with other retailers that were either Chevy or Honda or Kia. So,
How do you go about planning for the future now? Now that your company is a much more mature company than what it was originally when you started it. I mean, how do you go about preparing for the future of this company?
Well, there's two things that we do now that really help us manage that. One of them is we sat down in 2017 and did a 5-year strategic plan. And we kind of set goals for the 5-year period of what.
What led you to do that? Because a lot of companies just kind of come in every day and go to work and don't plan. What was there an event, or you just decided, or you talked with somebody?
No, one of the best things that we've done, and we've been in this group for 7 years now, is we have a peer group through the Family Business Institute. It's actually owned by Travelers now.
Oh, really? Really?
And it had an association or an affiliation with the AGC of America as well at the beginning. But the Family Business Institute has peer groups across the country, and they try to stick each company in a group of similar size businesses. And so we have a group of 8. And we have in our group a general contractor out of Austin. We have one from Boston. We have one from Georgia, just around the country. We don't compete against each other, but we sit down twice a year.
So you guys all come together someplace?
We all come together twice a year. We have a host company, and the benefit of being the host company is we do a 2.5-day evaluation of that business. We interview their employees. We look at their marketing material. We look at their accounting.
Significant. That's a significant amount of time commitment for a lot of people.
It really is. And so
to get smart people like that to come into your company, have you had it here?
Yeah, we've had it here twice. The rotation has come here through.
I bet you that was an eye-opening experience.
It is, but for me, the eye-opening experience is seeing these other businesses because they're all doing things a little bit different. They're all in a little bit different markets, and we just learn from each other. I mean, most of everything that was the genesis of the strategic plan came from that group. The facilitator for that group also did the strategic plan for Dean Bills, and he's done it also for the majority of other companies in the group.
Do you find a group getting stagnated like that where you have the same participants, or do you guys kind of grow together?
We grow together. I think we looked at our group this year, and it had something crazy like 1,000% growth since everybody's been in the group. It was just insane. I know 1,000 is probably way out of there, but it's significant. We're all really changing together, and all of our businesses are growing.
What's funny is that most people don't want to accept, evaluations from somebody that's your peer. It's like people are afraid of that, especially if you own your own. You own your own business. It's kind of like your baby. People don't want to accept, criticism or input. And I know how. To be honest with you, I feel the same way sometimes. But I kind of have to kick myself in the butt a little bit and say, hey, if you don't get, we just went through audits for every section of the company, and I had to hire an external auditor. And it was actually a great experience. We had actually Wayne Reynolds, which is a professor at EKU. He came in and evaluated our pre-construction sector. And it was great. It was hard because you had to swallow your pride a little bit because, there's a lot of things but it makes you better. And I guess that's the end goal.
It does make you better. And, I don't understand why this industry doesn't have a great appetite for collaboration. It's very strange, and we originally got involved in the AGC of Kentucky, and so there's a lot of collaboration that goes on really about industry topics, main industry topics. We work together to solve industry issues. Obviously do a lot of lobbying, we do a lot of training, and I've sat on the board of the AGC of Kentucky for almost 8 years. So I did have some experience with that, but like you were saying, Scott, you would, if you got a little bit too more intimate with your questions about strategy and how people do things, you could see that the posture became a little bit more standoffish.
Mm-hmm.
But I just kept pushing it, even with folks that I compete against. I call them all the time and ask them questions, because I'm like, why can't we all learn together, right? I mean, every other industry does. Why can't we do that?
And that's the other thing is that you can take two choices. You can either have a competitor or a partner.
Right.
And I've done the exact same thing, and it's amazing when you have the partnerships that you can bring. I have a partnership with somebody in California, someone in New Mexico, and so when I get in a position where I need help, I'll pick up the phone and vice versa, and we win together. So it is funny how you're very, very right about construction industry. It's so competitive that people think of you in a different way. So now that you have a 5-year strategic plan in place, I mean, how are you going about implementing that? And I'm not asking individual specifics. I'm just saying, how do you take it from? And I see this problem with many companies that we come in and audit. They'll have a strategic plan on paper, but their people in the company don't even know they have a strategic plan. They don't even know what that actually means. So how do you take it from paper to practice?
Yeah, I mean that's the difficult part about it, because the interesting part about this strategic plan, it wasn't just putting the plan in place. It was like we sat down for probably a day just trying to figure out who the heck we were. What are our core values? What are important? How are we recognized in the industry? And we probably invited half of our company to participate in that. And we sat down and really tried to analyze who we were as a business and what we wanted to do. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses?
It's funny, when I was younger, I thought that was a complete waste of time.
Yeah, I know it.
Dude, you probably feel the same way, but I thought it was a complete waste of time. And then when I was staring down, the company grew from me to being, we have 77 people now. When it grew from me to being 10 people or 20 people or 30 people, you can't, and they're scattered all over the place. If you don't have a set of core values, you say, hey, this is the way we do business.
Right.
Our core values are do the right thing, have urgency, and be the gold standard. Those are our 3 core values. That's something that I always believed and I practiced, and the people around me practiced, but people who were 1,000 miles away I couldn't convey that, and so we actually had to sit down. The first time I sat down, I thought this is a complete total waste of time.
Yeah.
And then now that I see where we're at now, I realize if I didn't do that, we probably would have failed.
Yeah. No, and it's a good exercise, because I think what you figure out is, especially you being a business owner, is sometimes your perception of your business is your own perception, and you get lost in that. And really what you're probably finding out, the same thing I found out, and really what I found out about when I had the opportunity to build the office in Alabama for Gray, is that it needs to be more, the business needs to be more than you. And that's the hard part, right? It just needs to be more than you. And if it's going to grow and it's going to be successful and it's going to have continuity, and continuity is the key word, because at some point you're going to want to get out of the business, then it needs to be able to be more than you.
And yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because I think a lot of times we become these one-man operations, or thinking that we work with a company right now, and every time I call the CEO of the company, they're a $100 million company. Every time I call him, he says, I have a line of 5 people waiting outside my door. Well, if you have a line of 5 people waiting outside your door, you have some issues there, because maybe you're not delegating, maybe people are not empowered to do what they need to do.
Right.
You really run the show, and I know how it is when you have money going out, and embezzlement's such a big issue.
Right.
You want to keep those things close to the chest, but you can't grow to the size company you want to grow, that you can eventually sell the company, if you don't give those things away. So
I think if you look at, if you look at succession planning, the best value for your business is probably being able to sell it to the key folks in your business. Most of the time, if you see companies that just disappear, they didn't have a succession plan. And a lot of times those businesses I see in the subcontractor market all the time, their identity was the owner, right? And everything that surrounded them was the owner. And
have you thought that far down the road?
Yeah, I mean, part of what we're learning in the peer group is succession. You know, a couple of the companies that are in it are going through it. You know, we not only have family businesses that are, a couple of them are on their third generation, two of the companies in our peer group, so they've gone through family succession. But there's also 3 companies in our group that are going through a succession plan that with key employees of the business. And so it's mapped out over a 5 to 7 year period of time, and you know, they go through that transition, and these folks transition into owners of the company. So,
And I think I always say the worst thing, and this kind of drove my strategy. My succession plan for my company is it's going to be an employee-owned company. And people say that's kind of cold-hearted. You're not even, because my son's in the construction management program at EKU,
right?
And he wants to go into our business. I have a daughter who also is going to the speed school in Louisville, and she wants to be involved in, or she may want to be involved in some way, shape, or form. And I have my oldest son is coming to work full time doing business development for our business. So I have three of my 4 children want to be involved in the business, but I told them that the business doesn't belong to you, and that's a hard thing to do. People say I'm cold-hearted, but I'm a believer that inheritance is one of the worst things you can do for your children,
Right?
Because it tears families apart, it creates issues. So I'm actually going through that right now, where we're doing worrying about succession and trying to get my ducks in a row. For me, it's 10 to 15 years out, but figuring out what brings value to your company is important to kind of plan out, you know.
Yeah.
And it's really opened my eyes to, like, what's value, you know. I mean, is it the building you're in, or is it the people, or is it the customers? And it's a lot of everything, you know. So, personally, what skills and ability do you think that you have that have helped the business?
You know, I think, you know, one of the big things that I've seen is I feel like I have a good ability to see, you know, the big picture. You know, I'm always focused on the big picture. And I think I also do a decent job of finding good people and being able to have a connection with them. I think if you look at Dean Builds, I feel like we've really hired some solid, capable people.
You know, when I talk to people and I bring your name up, or your name comes up in the conversation, it's interesting because there's a lot of jerks in our industry.
Yeah, there are.
They really, I don't know how else to say it besides that's the truth. And always the comment that I hear from people is, besides you being a good business person and being successful in business, is you're just a good person, you know. And I want to, and I'm not saying that because you're my friend or because we're on a podcast. I really truly believe that.
Yeah.
And I've had many other people say it. And so I have to really commend you for that, because that's hard to do in the business, especially over years, because it kind of almost forces you to kind of be that way.
Right.
But I think you figured out that even if somebody else is that way to you, you don't have to be that way in return.
Yeah, and you know that's sometimes a double-edged sword, but most of the time it's been, you know, for me it's important because of this. I don't want to. If you look at what happens after your life, I mean, what are people going to remember, right? I mean, are they really going to remember everything that you built or Dean builds? I mean, I always say, no one remembers who built the Guggenheim Museum, right?
No.
They know who the architect is, but they don't know who built it. So what do you want to be known for, right? And, you know, having a positive influence on people's life and knowing that you really strive to be a good servant leader and be a good member of the community and work constantly on making your people better than they were before they came here. And those are all, you know, deep core values for us as a business.
You know, and I think that what you said is what I'm a believer too, and I think it's because we both have had personal experiences that have changed our life. You know, me with loss of my leg, you with your cancer. Those things have a way of changing the way you think.
Right.
Because when I was 20 years old, I was a total, complete loose cannon. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, and I thought that the way to get things done is just scream and yell, and then it came to a point where you realize what you exactly say is that
Yeah.
what are you leaving behind? Because you don't take anything with you. I
No.
mean, yeah, that's
None of it's going to matter.
it doesn't it does not matter, and then my biggest question I've always had, especially when I went through some more difficult times, is if in the end it doesn't matter, then why am I doing what I'm doing?
Right.
And then I realized, well, there's a reason for that, because you have a chance to affect other people's lives.
You do. I mean, and that's your platform, right?
Absolutely.
I was talking to a friend of mine, Rob Perez, and he owns a restaurant that we're involved in that gives second chance employment to folks that have had drug addiction, alcohol addiction, and have been in jail. And, those guys have a hard time finding employment when they get out of these programs. So Rob started this restaurant, and, the first thing he said is like, he looked at me and he's like, I can. He lives a similar life to me, where it's Christ based.
Yes,
we're
absolutely,
Christians, and one of the things he said is that I can sit there and do certain things and plug myself into certain committees and groups and schools at Sunday school or church. He goes, but I just figured out that my platform, and this is what our platform is I can affect people's lives at a greater value by owning a business and hiring people and giving them a chance or a second chance. And that's his whole platform for this restaurant. So, that's pretty powerful, right? He kind of figured out what his strength was. And so far he's been successful at building this program over there.
And about my company. I mean, I make it widely known. It's no secret. We're a Christian-based company, and some people will say that, but I got some criticism over the fish. I use the Jesus fish as my company symbol, and I do that for a reason, because I want people to know where I'm coming from, right? And I also believe that what you said there is, this is my platform.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we do is one of our commitments is we give 10% of everything we make to Southland Christian Church.
Yeah.
And it's not about that we want credit for. I mean, I've been criticized left and right about it, because are you taking credit for it? Why are you putting it out there? I'm putting it out there because it's an accountability thing for me.
Yeah.
A lot of people, when it comes to tithing, will be like, oh, I'm going to keep it secret. I'm going to keep it to myself. And we live in an environment where that's the kind of thought process there. And for me, it's more of an accountability thing. Hey, I said I'm going to do something. I'm going to go do it. And somebody asked me once, well, why would you even give 10% to your church? And I said, well, number one, God commands you to do it.
Yeah, right.
But more importantly, why does he command you to do it? He commands you to do it because he wants to show that you have your values in the right place.
Yeah.
You have your priorities in the right place. That 10%, God doesn't need money. I mean, That means nothing to him, He could have all the money in the world if he wanted to, but it's just, what are you going to do with the resources he's given you? And I also figured out, too, money is a great force multiplier, because you can take money and do things for people that change their destiny in their life. And that's what I loved about EKU, is because there's one thing you can never take away from a person, and that's their education.
Yeah.
And the former president of EKU said that one time, and I thought, that's true. You can take money, but you can't take their education from them. And I started thinking about that, and I thought, well, you can also, there's all the other things you can do. You can never take away an opportunity you give somebody. Once you give them that opportunity, what they do with it is on them. It's between them and God. I always say that all the time. Brief story here, and I try to prove this point. There was a young lady who was one of my daughter's friends. I grew up kind of in a poor environment, and I had a heart for that because I grew up really poor. And so all our friends and stuff were getting cars when they turned 16 and 17. You know how it is, especially in Jessamine County. A car equals freedom.
Right.
Well, in America, a car equals freedom.
Right.
So I went and bought her a car, and I didn't buy her a car because I wanted a pat on the back or this or that, but I bought her a car because the opportunities that gave her an opportunity to work, They gave her opportunity to go to school. They gave her opportunity to do a lot of different things. Now, she made a couple choices that were probably not, she didn't get full insurance on the car, and she got rear-ended and affected the car. She still has it and disabled drivable, but she made different choices that kind of made it more difficult. But at the end of the day, it doesn't take away the fact that you try to help somebody. And it actually worked out well because she's in her second year at Asbury.
Oh, great. Yeah.
And she's going into ministry. So, you never know what God's plan is.
Yeah.
And it's...
and we all make mistakes, right?
Yeah, and you know what, the thing, I got a little frustrated by it, but then I got to remind myself that she's 17, 18.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Gosh, when I was 18 years old, I was off the rails.
No, I think that's important, and from a company standpoint, not just a life standpoint, but a company standpoint too. That is our core value, is giving back to our community and our industry. And we push a lot of our employees to get involved in that through different nonprofit organizations. And then we started this year, actually, for a birthday month. If it's your birthday, you get to donate $100 to whatever organization that you would like to donate it to, and it'll be made in your name through the company. And the only responsibility you have for that is to tell us a little bit about the organization and what their mission is. And even with our self-perform guys, they come in and they participate in that as well. So it's
that's a great idea.
Yeah, been eye-opening.
We're actually thinking about doing. I assigned our accountant actually to figure out we're gonna continue to donate to the church, but we also want to do another charity idea, and that's actually a great idea. I think. Figure out where to direct that to. What do you think were the 5? I don't like to use the F word, and that's failure. Yeah. but what do you believe were the 5 biggest failures in your life that you probably were? Because I'm a personal believer that failure is probably the best thing that can ever happen to you.
No,
because
right,
it teaches you what not to do. What do you think those 5 biggest failures were?
It took me a while to kind of figure out what failures I would put in my life. I don't know, I don't really concentrate that much on failures. Mm-hmm. I try to learn from them. I mean, we daily have occurrences that we feel like are failures. You have projects that are failures. You have hired, you've hired people. You've made mistakes in your business that are failures. But I don't I don't focus on them. I really kind of try to keep my eyes forward. The only 2 that I really popped in my mind is my original partnership. I also listed that as one of my 5 biggest successes too, because I learned a lot from that. Partnerships are tough, and everybody, I think through the years you start putting priorities on different things, and your risk tolerances are different. And everybody says they want to grow a business, but as you've experienced, it's the hardest thing that you can possibly do.
And you got to be willing. The risk, you said risk tolerance there. I mean, that's
risk tolerance is huge, and everybody's perception of risk is different. And if you're not aligned with that, it's a disaster.
Well, partnership is a marriage, and if you're not.
But you look at any of these big successful companies that have grown, they have stretched themselves, right? And they have stretched themselves to where they put themselves in a place of being uncomfortable. And they lived in that uncomfortable state for multiple years as they built this business. And if you don't have a tolerance for that, it's not a good partnership. So I think that's probably fundamentally one of the things that went wrong with it.
And there's a lot of people who say, I want to own a business, or I want to do this, or I want to do that. I had a situation where someone wanted to be a part of the business, and I offered that part of the business, but the consequences of that were real,
Yeah, right.
And you got to be willing to do things like, I don't know how many years I used my house as leverage so I could do work.
No, you're right. Especially from a bonding standpoint, line of credit standpoint.
And now bonding companies don't accept. They want you to personally indemnify everything.
You're right.
So it's like, are you?
There's a way to get out of that, but yes,
okay.
You're right.
Well, I have to talk to you offline about that.
Right.
But the whole that whole premise, and people are, and I think in America in general. Success has been put down almost,
Yeah.
I mean, not so much lately, but in the past it's been like, oh, well, if you're successful, that's because you somehow took it from somebody else or something like that. When in reality, it's that you were willing to risk and work, maybe risk more and work more, or and also maybe you had an opportunity, but you took advantage of the opportunity.
The other piece to that too is past the risk tolerance is the life balance part, right? So, life balance is becoming more and more of a big thing, especially with younger folks that are coming out of college. Part of the conversations you have in multiple interviews is life balance.
Which is funny because you look at when me or you hear that, I want to choke somebody out.
Yeah, right. It's a generational thing, I think. Yes. But for me, and I think for anybody that's growing a business, and you can look at even the folks that have been truly successful. Life balance was probably not there. And I think when you're growing a business and you're a business owner, that's what you're going to struggle with is that life balance piece past the risk tolerance. Yeah.
Is your family involved in any way, or is it just you?
Well, it's just me. My father has a CPA firm here, and he's I lean on him for his support when we purchased the business, and then I lean on him from a tax standpoint and financial standpoint. So he's involved in the business from that aspect.
Because my wife's involved too. She's the controller of our company, and I think it's interesting when I've made a conscious choice, although it has been tough at times to have my wife just kind of fell into it because I was busy doing other stuff, so she took over that responsibility. And I look at it now and I think, I don't know, was it the right decision? Was it the wrong decision? Well, we're at this place anyhow. But it could be very rewarding. I know your son, how old is your son? He's 20s?
Yeah, he's a senior in college. And then I have a son that we adopted that graduated University of Louisville last year, and he's an accountant. He working for LG&E.
Any kids have any interest in the business?
No, I think my Robert, who's the senior, is probably he's interested in going to law school, and then my youngest is interested in med school. But that is the trend in our family, is that, I look back 3 or 4 generations and we've all owned our own businesses and no one has followed in their father's footsteps. So really? I don't know if that's genetic or what.
Well, I think it's, that over 60% of all businesses fail in their second generation. And 90%, it's between 80 and 90, fail third generation. That's why there's huge tax incentives for third generation companies, because that's a hard thing.
It really is tough.
I was talking to Judy Construction. They're working on the third, and the tax implications for them are there's a lot of incentives to further the business, but it is a hard thing. I don't know, maybe because they grow up around it, they're not interested because they grow up around it, or my kids just saw it as, hey, this is a huge opportunity.
It is an opportunity,
and I could be part of it. So. What do you think your 5 business successes you had as a company, a person?
Well, fundamentally is hiring smart and good people, to grow the business. I mean, I felt like we've done a really good job of putting people on the bus at the right time, to use that term. We even hire folks that if we find a good project manager or a good executive or a good superintendent, even if we don't need them, if they come by, we grab them. And that's hard to do, especially when you don't have an immediate need. The overhead, you're going to float on that. But we've been successful at that just for the fact that you just can't pass off those opportunities if you're growing a business. I think that's been good. The peer group has been just tremendous support. I mean, I learn a lot from those guys. They're almost like an advisory board. And you can lean on them. If I get in a bind contractually on anything or have questions, I can call them. And it's been a huge benefit to be involved in that peer group. You look at 5-year strategic plans are important. A lot of companies don't do that. A lot of companies don't do a marketing plan. And it's very difficult to reach a goal, or if you don't have a plan in place to reach it, right? So, or even if you don't even know what your goal is, how are you going to get to where you want to be? So those are good. And I think we do a really good job of finding what I call lifetime customers. We're going after customers that have successful building programs and that are in a growth mode. Because if we can repetitively build the same building with the same architect and with the same owner, that continuity takes a lot of risk out of it.
Especially in our market nowadays,
And that's how we've grown this business, is what we call lifetime customers. We've looked for customers that are going to grow and that have building programs, and we've kind of hooked onto them.
And you figured something out that few people haven't figured out. So I'm going to give your secret away here, but it's all about relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny. It's not a secret. Everybody knows it.
Yep.
But that's what it's really about. It's about relationships, knowing people, helping people, being straight up with people. I mean, the fact is, we're in business. We're in the business to make a profit. I mean,
Right.
There's no secret there. But being fair, being reasonable, and you figured that out because talking with people, because I know some of your past clients or whatever. They know you.
Yes.
They don't know you just as David, the owner of Dean Builds. They know you as David Dean, the
Right.
father, the businessman, the involved with his church, all the different aspects. They really do.
And I think if you look at the way we sell work, we're not a hard bid general contractor. We don't just pick up a set of plans and put a bid in. That's a whole nother market that we're just not successful in. We actually rely on building relationships with customers, and that's our focus. If you look at we're very top heavy on the pre-construction and marketing and business development side. If you look at the majority of our heavy hitters inside this company, they're very good at pre-construction. And when I say that, it's like we put an emphasis on trying to get to a customer about the same time the architect or engineer does. Mm-hmm. We would like to help them with that service if there's a design build opportunity there, but we still want to be there at that same point. So, and then you bring a value to the team when you can conceptually estimate and schematically estimate and keep a job through the design phase on budget. So when you finally get done with your 100% design documents, send it out to bid, the project's still on budget. That's a big strength of ours. And I think building...
It's a hard skill set to build.
It is, yeah. It is, because you're really... If you look at the overhead of the company, you put a lot of emphasis on that. And if we were a hard bid contractor, there's probably at least a handful of people we wouldn't have in this business. And the makeup would be completely different.
So, what's the future of Dean Builds?
Continue to grow, build quality buildings. Our key to our future is just being smart about diversification in our markets. We need to figure out what we're good at, continue to figure out what we're good at, continue to figure out what the customers value us for. And sometimes I say that because we made mistakes in the past where we put a lot of resources towards a project that just wasn't a good project for Dean Builds. And we got to be smart on what we decide to chase and who we want to chase.
That sounds so simple, but it's really very complex.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, when you say it, I think, that's not... But it is much more complex than it sounds.
Yeah, we in the past, we've gotten hooked into a couple of big jobs that just never happened. And we did a ton of work on the pre-construction side. And typically, you fee that service at a pretty low margin so that you can get in the door and build the building. And we made a few mistakes of hooking into a couple of big projects that just disappeared after we got to the point of construction. So that is not good. So.
Well, let me ask you this. If you were to give advice to someone who would be listening to this podcast that is an aspiring, driven young man or woman coming up in the construction industry, what advice would you give them to be able to pursue that and, not only pursue it, but do it successfully and have their mind in the right place?
Yeah.
And what advice would you give?
The biggest thing, and this is the hardest thing to do every day, is be your best, even when not being your best still gets by. How many people have you seen that just come in and just still get the project done or their task done, but they didn't give it their best effort, right? That's probably 70% of the people in the workforce, right? So if you want to move up in a company, and if you want to be successful in a company, you need to do your best no matter what the circumstance is. The biggest benefit to me when I was growing up through Gray, which was a big corporation, is I sat down on a yearly basis with my boss, and I kind of mapped out where I wanted to be. So if I wanted to be a project manager, I sat down with my boss and asked him, what things do I need to do this year to prove to you that I can be a project manager? When I wanted to be a senior project manager, what things did I need to do to where I could be a senior project manager? And so when you meet those goals and those specifics, because they'll give them to you, you can sit down there with that checklist and say, hey, I checked all the boxes off. I think I'd make a great senior project manager. I think I'd make a great regional office manager. I think I'd make a great vice president, because I've clicked off I listened to everything you told me to do, and I checked off the boxes. And, and I think when you set goals for yourself like that, it's the easiest way to get to where you want to be. And the other thing I always tell people is do more than what you're asked to do. Right? How many times have you sat there and listened to a person say, well, I just did what you asked me to do. Do more than what you're asked to do. If you're going to move up in a company and you're going to be successful in a business or a business owner, you have to do more than you're asked to do. It's pretty simple. So those are the three things advice-wise. I think the fourth and most important thing, because I've seen so many failures with really sharp people that were either business owners or moving up in their career, is that they did not marry well. And that seems to be a little strange to say, but if you don't find and work just as hard on finding a good partner that's going to be by your side, that has the same goal alignment you do in your life, you're not going to be successful.
That is really interesting, and I think that's so devalued in the world we live in right now. But that I can tell you right now, on top of the fact that she would have half of everything I have.
Yeah, right.
But the truth is, my wife has been content with sitting in the shadows, supporting me.
Yeah.
And not asking for any of the credit. And I always feel bad when I get the credit for something, because it's like she's in the shadows. But she's told me that she feels good when I get the credit, because that means that she helped me.
Well, and if you look at it a little bit further than that, I mean, it's just like running another business. Raising kids and having a family and having a life that you feel proud of at the end. It's a team effort, and if you don't have a strong person that's going to be by your side during that, and still have the respect for that individual, and make them understand how important they are to the whole success of just not the business but your family and your life. I've seen a lot of failures that have happened because of that. People made either a mistake on picking a spouse, or they made a mistake of rushing into something too quick, or they never sat down and aligned their goals before they got married. Why wouldn't you sit down and just make sure you had common goals? I mean, it's just like I don't want to say it's just like a business, because there's a love factor there, that passion is there that kind of blinds you from that. But, it's important to have that same alignment, because everything we've all talked about this last hour about successfully running a business is that you've got to successfully run a marriage in the middle of it all. And, and if you don't, it can be devastating to your business.
Absolutely. And, nothing, you think about people who had business who had failed. And I always equate the military to construction, because there's a lot of similarities there. One of them is the travel. One of the unfortunate things is the monogamous relationships that don't exist because of the travel.
Right.
And not that I want to bring that up and make a big deal of it, but let's be real here. That's an issue in our world, the world we live in, and the construction industry.
One of the things that I did is some of the people that we brought down to Alabama, for a career move. These regional offices were great, for career moves. So when I brought a new estimator down, or when I brought a new project manager from Lexington down to the Alabama office, they said, "Hey, I want you to come down here for an interview." And they're like, "Well, I can be on a plane the next day, or I can drive down there. I'll be down there Tuesday or Wednesday for the interview." I'm like, "No. I want your wife to come to the interview." I said, "Because if your wife's not happy about living in Birmingham, you're not going to be happy living in Birmingham." Yeah. And, I worked just as hard at making sure the whole family unit was going to be comfortable in Birmingham.
And this kind of goes full circle, as we talked about before, not only for business but personal. Relationships is where it's at.
Yeah.
Whether it's dealing with your employee's family, or you're dealing with a potential client, or your employee itself, but relationships are everything. And see, the thing is, you get that, and that's what most people don't get, and that's probably why you've been successful.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
So I'm gonna throw a few important topics in construction, and I just want to, if you had to give me a scale of 1 to 10 on these topics, and I find this interesting because people say different items are important. So 1 to 10, how important do you think scheduling is?
For us, it's definitely an 8 or a 9.
What about estimating?
Estimating for us is just as high as of importance. If you don't have a good solid estimate, you're not going to make money, and you might not get the job. So,
contract administration.
That was something that we developed through the years. I was going to put a really high number on that, but we get better every year at contract administration. It's important, and obviously through some failures, you learn some things that you need to modify as it relates to subcontracts and owner contracts. But I think if you were starting a business, if you had a solid contract to begin with, boilerplate, and then you just modify it year after year.
You didn't give me a number.
That's
a tough one.
It's probably, it ranges from a 7 to a 9.
Okay. What about design?
Well, design, there needs to be more importance put on it. From us, we don't have a design staff internal. When we do design build projects, we look at external relationships for that. It's important because it seems like design is, in our opinion, is lacking, especially when it comes to total coordination of design, and it's making our projects harder to build, and it has scheduling impacts as well. That would be a 7 or 8.
Okay. Contract's going to go to contract administration, so I'll leave that. What about accounting?
If you look at the part back at the beginning of this company, the first thing that I changed was accounting. Mm-hmm. I came right through the door and changed it. And it was the biggest priority I had as a business owner at the time, because construction accounting is difficult. There's a lot of adjustments specifically from the WIP report when it comes to over and under billings. And if you don't have a good handle on that, and then also projecting costs on a monthly basis with your project managers for a project, your company could be sinking and you wouldn't even know it. Mm-hmm. And that to me, that's a 10.
Okay. What about leadership?
Fundamentally, leadership is the most important part, right? So it defines company culture. If you have sat there and you're looking at a project manager, you're dealing with a superintendent, and you're analyzing their personality, a lot of times you can directly tie that back up to the leadership of the company.
When I was doing a podcast with Mark, it's funny because it seems like there's a consistent answer when it comes to leadership. It's such a broad thing. People think it's important, but it's not that important because it's a broad concept. But I talked last time about a research study done by Alabama that actually went through technical and soft skills, and what they found out, and which was surprising to me, is that soft skills are where it's at. Yeah. I mean, we can teach technical skills, but some of the soft skills are really tough to teach.
Yeah, the hardest part now for, if you look at my kids that are in college, or anybody's kids that are coming out of college, how do you have that verbal debate with somebody? right? I mean, most of them haven't had to deal with that. Most of their debates are, electronic. Most of the time that there's conflict, it's dealt with electronically. But how many of them have really sat down and just debated somebody on an issue, right, verbally? And that leads into our industry being able to sit down with subcontractors, vendors, and owners and being able to debate through a conflict, right, and problem solve. Verbally problem solve.
And you're right. And it seemed like the focus has come off of, well, as you know, and I've heard you say this before, but people would rather send an email or a text than pick up the phone and call somebody.
Right.
And from most business owners, I hear that's the biggest issue is that people just want to pick up the phone and call somebody because it's uncomfortable.
Right. I push our guys all the time. It's like, have you gone to their office? Have you sat down with them? Have you gone to their place of business?
It's funny how by doing those things, getting face to face, it's a whole different ballgame.
It's a whole different ballgame. Right?
Well, David, I want to thank you for meeting with me today and taking an hour of your time. I do want to say, great office. I love your office.
Yeah, appreciate it. Just moved in a year ago. So.
Lot better than the place you had before.
Yeah, right.
Although that place changed. I remember when you first moved in there in 2008 compared to where I moved there last time. But that's great. I'm glad to hear you're successful, of no surprise to me at all. And
I appreciate our friendship, and obviously we've pulled resources from you as well, and I always say that we're only as good as the partnerships that we have. So
absolutely.
Thanks for that.
Absolutely. So on CONEXEC, we're gonna next interview we're having is with Stephen Gray from Gray Construction, and we'll see you in about a week.